What you're about to witness is not a fairy tale. It's not a story manufactured for comfort or convenience. It's the account of a single evening in late autumn that would ultimately expose the invisible walls we build around privilege, the assumptions we carry about worth, and the unexpected places where transformation begins. This is the story of Richard Carmichael, Marcus Carmichael, and Maya Johnson. Three people, one restaurant, and a moment that would challenge everything they thought they knew about power, dignity, and what it means to truly see another human being. Richard Carmichael's name appeared in financial publications with the regularity of sunrise. At 52, he had constructed an empire through a combination of strategic brilliance and calculated risk. The kind of wealth he'd accumulated didn't just buy things, it bought silence, distance, and a particular kind of loneliness that even he didn't fully recognize. Success at that level creates its own ecosystem. People orbited around you, but rarely with you. Every smile calculated, every conversation transactional. Richard had learned to read the room, to see through false sincerity, to protect himself from those who wanted access to his resources rather than connection with his humanity. He'd built walls, not just around his estate in Connecticut, but around something more essential, around the part of himself that still remembered being hungry, being dismissed, being the kid from the wrong neighborhood who had to prove he belonged in every room he entered. But there was one person who saw through those walls completely. His son, Marcus, 8 years old, born with cerebral palsy that affected his mobility but left his mind sharp and his spirit somehow untouched by the limitations his body imposed. Marcus had his father's eyes, observant, intelligent, and something Richard had lost along the way, an openness to the world that hadn't yet been compromised by disappointment. Richard loved his son with an intensity that frightened him, because love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury billionaires couldn't afford. So he protected Marcus, perhaps too fiercely, perhaps in ways that, despite his intentions, built different kinds of walls. The restaurant was called Harvest Moon, not the type of establishment where Richard typically conducted his life. No Michelin recognition, no waiting list managed by someone who determined whether you were important enough to be granted a table. Just honest food, warm lighting, and the kind of atmosphere where working families celebrated anniversaries and children's birthdays with careful budgeting and genuine joy. Marcus had asked to come here. For 3 consecutive weeks, passing by on the way to physical therapy appointments, he'd noticed the string lights in the windows, the families visible through the glass, laughing over shared meals. And finally, he'd asked his father a question that landed with unexpected weight. Can we eat there? With normal people? Normal people. The phrase revealed more than Marcus intended. What he was really asking was whether they could step outside the bubble of wealth and specialized care that surrounded their lives. Whether they could experience, even briefly, the ordinary texture of human connection that seemed to exist everywhere except in their carefully controlled world. So Richard agreed, and on a Tuesday evening, they entered Harvest Moon. Richard in a suit that cost more than most patrons earned in a month. Marcus in his wheelchair, custom designed by aerospace engineers, featuring technology that maximized his support and mobility. Around them, life hummed with casual authenticity. Families, couples, the percussion of silverware against plates, conversations layered over one another in a symphony of ordinary existence. Richard felt conspicuously out of place, but Marcus was smiling, and for that smile, Richard would have endured far more discomfort than this. Her name tag identified her as Maya. Late 20s, with dark skin that seemed to absorb and reflect the warm restaurant lighting simultaneously. Her uniform was pressed despite visible wear at the seams, her hair pulled back with practical efficiency. But it was something else Richard noticed first. Something that caught him off guard. Maya looked at Marcus, not at the wheelchair, not at the specialized equipment, not at the expensive clothing that marked them as different from the restaurant's usual clientele. She looked at Marcus's face, at his eyes, at him. In Richard's experience, people had 2 reactions to Marcus. They either couldn't look at him, discomfort making them avert their eyes, their voices taking on that particular tone of forced cheerfulness, or they looked at him with pity, seeing only limitation rather than possibility. Maya did neither. Well, hello there, handsome, she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. I love that shirt. Spider-Man, right? He's my favorite too. Marcus lit up in a way that Richard recognized, the way his son responded when someone spoke to him like a person rather than a patient, like a child rather than a condition. Yes! Do you know about Miles Morales? And just like that, they were talking. Not the careful, overly articulated conversation adults often had with Marcus. Not the patronizing enthusiasm that made Richard's jaw clench. Just conversation. About comic books, about animation, about whether web shooters or organic webs made more sense scientifically. Richard sat with his menu unopened, watching something he rarely witnessed. Someone seeing his son. Not his son's disability. Not his son's challenges. Just his son. If you're watching this because you recognize something in this story, a moment when someone saw you, truly saw you, leave a comment. These stories matter. Your experience matters. Maya. The voice cut through their conversation with the precision of a blade. The manager, Paul, according to his name tag, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a smile that existed entirely separate from any genuine feeling. The smile of someone performing professionalism rather than experiencing it. Table 6 needs refills. We have actual customers waiting. Actual customers. The phrase hung in the air with weight Richard immediately recognized. The subtle hierarchy embedded in those two words, the implication of who mattered and who merely occupied space. But Maya's response carried no visible reaction. She simply smiled, practiced, professional, and said she'd be right there. Then she turned back to Marcus, her attention never wavering. So, what sounds good to you, Miles Morales? Marcus giggled. An actual giggle. The sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. As Maya took their order, Richard found himself observing more than just the interaction between her and his son. He noticed the way the manager watched them, the way a couple at a nearby table whispered, their glances moving between Marcus's wheelchair and Maya's face, their expressions carrying judgments they thought were private. He noticed the young blonde hostess smirking as Maya walked past, a small cruelty that she assumed no one important would see. Richard was no stranger to judgment. He'd built his empire despite whispers about his background, about being new money, about not belonging in certain rooms, certain clubs, certain conversations. He'd learned to use that dismissal as fuel, converting their doubt into his success. But this was different. This wasn't judgment directed at him. This was something else entirely, something that made him uncomfortable in a way he wasn't accustomed to feeling. 20 minutes later, after their food arrived, Maya delivering it with the same genuine attention, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted. The owner, celebrating some family milestone, had arranged for live music. A jazz trio materialized in the corner, double bass, piano, drums. They began to play something slow and soulful, the kind of melody that bypasses conscious thought and speaks directly to something older in the human experience. Marcus's eyes widened. Richard knew that look. Music did something for his son that nothing else could. It made his body feel cooperative. His physical therapist incorporated rhythm into their sessions, using music to help Marcus's muscles remember patterns, to find flow where there was usually resistance. Marcus began to move in his chair, subtle movements, his shoulders, his head, a gentle sway that matched the music's pulse. His face transformed into pure joy. And then he looked at his father and said 7 words that cracked something fundamental in Richard's carefully constructed emotional architecture. Dad, I wish I could dance. Not walk, not some miracle cure. Just dance, just move to music, just feel normal. Richard opened his mouth, searching for some response, some way to solve this problem the way he solved everything else, with resources, with money, with the application of wealth to eliminate obstacles. And then Maya reappeared. You want to dance? Her voice carried certainty rather than question. Marcus looked up, surprised and uncertain. I can't. Sure you can, Maya said, and there was no pity in her voice, no performance of kindness for an audience, just matter-of-fact truth. You're already dancing. I can see it. Your body knows the rhythm. We just got to help it show the world. She looked at Richard. May I? Richard hesitated. Every instinct told him to protect Marcus, to shield him from disappointment, from people who made promises they couldn't keep, from good intentions that ended in tears. But something in Maya's eyes stopped him, a knowing, a certainty that felt earned rather than assumed. He nodded. Maya knelt beside Marcus's wheelchair. "Okay," she said, "here's what we're going to do. I'm going to stand here, and you're going to lead. You tell your body how to move, and I'll be your partner, your anchor. But you're in charge. Deal?" Marcus's smile could have powered the city. Deal. And then it happened. Maya took Marcus's hands, gently, carefully, respecting the tremors, the limited range of motion, and she started swaying, slowly, to the rhythm. Marcus's arms moved, jerky, uncoordinated, but moving. His shoulders followed, his head, and Maya moved with him. Not leading, not pulling, just flowing. Like she was translating his body's language into dance. Marcus was dancing, not perfectly. Not the way other children danced, but authentically, joyfully, freely. Richard felt tears burning behind his eyes, threatening to fall. When was the last time he'd seen his son this alive? This present? This simply, completely happy? At first, the restaurant responded with smiles. It was sweet, heartwarming, the kind of moment people record on their phones for social media, accompanied by hashtags about kindness and humanity. But then the whispers began. Is she seriously doing this during her shift? The voice came from table 6, a middle-aged woman in pearls, her tone carrying just enough volume to ensure it would be heard. So unprofessional, her companion agreed. This isn't a charity event. The manager reappeared. Paul, his face tight, his approach purposeful. Maya, a word. Now. Maya didn't stop dancing with Marcus, didn't even look up. 1 minute, Paul. Now, Maya. Richard felt something ignite in his chest. Anger. Not the cold, calculated variety he employed in boardrooms. Something hotter, more primal. He stood. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a man accustomed to being heard. "She's with us. I believe that means she's doing exactly what a good server should do, ensuring her customers are satisfied." Paul's eyes widened slightly. He'd clearly registered Richard's watch, his suit, the subtle markers of serious wealth. "Sir, I understand, but we have policies." "I don't recall asking about your policies," Richard said, still quiet, still controlled. "I recall my son expressing a desire, and this young woman fulfilling it." The restaurant had gone quiet. The music continued, but people were watching now, and Richard realized something that made him even angrier. They weren't just seeing a wealthy man defend his server. They were seeing a black woman, in uniform, being challenged by authority, and a rich white man intervening on her behalf. It disrupted the expected script. It made people uncomfortable. Paul retreated, but his expression promised consequences. Maya finished the dance with Marcus, neither acknowledging the tension building around them. When the song ended, Marcus was breathless, glowing. That was the best, ever. Maya smiled, and Richard saw something in her expression, understanding, recognition, like she knew exactly what this meant to Marcus, because perhaps she'd felt invisible too. As Maya stood, Richard spoke quietly. Thank you. Maya met his eyes, and for a moment something passed between them, not romantic, not transactional, just human, an acknowledgement of a shared moment, a shared truth. He's got rhythm, Maya said softly. Real rhythm. That's a gift. Then she squeezed Marcus's shoulder gently and returned to work. But Richard noticed something he couldn't ignore. The way the other servers looked at her now, the way the manager's eyes followed her movements, the way the woman in pearls summoned her over, voice dripping with false sweetness, requesting modifications to her meal that were clearly designed to be difficult rather than necessary. And he realized this moment of joy was going to cost Maya something. If this story is resonating with you, consider subscribing. We share stories like this because they matter, because these moments of human connection deserve to be witnessed and remembered. Richard Carmichael didn't become a billionaire by ignoring problems. He became one by identifying them and deploying resources towards solutions. And right now, he recognized a problem. As they finished their meal, Richard watched Maya move through the restaurant. Efficient, professional, kind to every table, smile, including the ones that treated her like furniture, including the ones that treated her worse. And something in him shifted fundamentally. Richard had spent decades convincing himself the world was a meritocracy, that success was about intelligence, drive, determination, that he'd earned everything through his own effort, and perhaps he had earned it. But watching Maya, watching how hard she worked, how much grace she demonstrated, how she'd given Marcus something priceless and asked for nothing in return. He realized something deeply uncomfortable. He'd earned his success, but he'd also been allowed to earn it. There were doors that opened for him that might not open for Maya. Not because she was less talented, not because she worked less hard, but because the game was structured in ways he'd never had to consciously acknowledge. When the check came, Richard did something impulsive, something uncharacteristic. He left a tip of $5,000 and his business card, with one sentence written on the back, "Call me. Let's talk about your future." But before they could leave, Richard heard voices from the kitchen area, sharp, cold. "Don't care if he tipped you $1 million, Maya. You made a scene. You embarrassed this establishment." "I was taking care of a customer. That child wanted to dance. I helped him dance." "That child is in a wheelchair. You made him a spectacle, made us all look like." Like what, Paul? The question hung in the air, unanswered and damning. Richard found himself moving before he'd consciously decided, found himself walking toward the kitchen entrance. Marcus called out, concerned, but Richard held up a hand. He pushed through the door. Maya and Paul stood by the dish station. Paul's face was red, Maya's expression carefully neutral, the expression of someone who'd learned that showing emotion was dangerous. "Finish that sentence," Richard said quietly. Paul spun around. "Sir, this is a private—" "Finish it," Richard repeated. "You were about to say my son's wheelchair made you all look like what exactly?" Paul's mouth opened, closed. "And while you're thinking about that," Richard continued, his voice still quiet but with steel underneath, "consider this. That woman just gave my son something I couldn't purchase. Something no specialist, no equipment, no amount of money could provide." He stepped closer. Dignity, joy, the feeling of being normal, of being seen. "So if you have a problem with how she did her job, take it up with me, because I'm the customer, and I'm telling you, she performed her job better than anyone here." Maya was staring at him, her carefully neutral expression cracking, something like surprise, something like recognition. Paul looked between them, and then he said something that revealed everything. "Mister, whoever you are, I don't think you understand how things work here. Maya's a good worker, but she needs to remember her place. She's here to serve food, not what?" Maya's voice now, quiet, but underneath thunder. "Not be human, not show kindness, not remind you that people in wheelchairs are people, that my black hands can create beautiful moments just like anyone else's?" The kitchen went silent. Even the dishwasher stopped. Maya continued, and Richard heard years of swallowed words finally breaking free. "You want to fire me, Paul? Go ahead. But don't pretend it's about professionalism. Don't pretend it's about policy. Be honest about what this really is. Say it." Maya. A new voice. An older black woman stepped through the back entrance. Lorraine, the owner's wife. Richard had seen her earlier, greeting guests with genuine warmth. She was looking at Paul like she'd just discovered something rotten. "Paul," Lorraine said slowly, "did you just tell this young woman to remember her place?" Paul paled. "No, I know exactly what you were doing." Lorraine turned to Maya. "Baby girl, you okay?" Maya nodded, but her hands were shaking. Lorraine looked at Richard. "I apologize. This doesn't represent how we run this establishment." "Actually," Richard said carefully, "I think it does. I think it represents exactly the invisible battles people fight every day, and the ones those of us with privilege don't see because we don't have to." He looked at Maya. "I left you my card. I meant what I wrote. But I want to know something first." Maya met his eyes. "What do you actually want to do? What's your dream?" Maya hesitated. Then, "Physical therapy. I want to be a pediatric physical therapist. I want to help kids like Marcus, kids whose bodies don't always cooperate. I want to help them dance." "I grew up with cerebral palsy too," Maya said quietly, milder than Marcus's, "mostly in my left leg. But I know what it feels like, to want to move and have your body say no, to watch other kids play and feel separate." Richard's breath caught. "My grandmother used to dance with me, just like I danced with your son. She taught me that dance isn't about perfect movement. It's about expression, freedom." Maya's eyes glistened. "She died last year. Couldn't afford the treatment she needed. Medical debt. No insurance. I've been taking classes online, working 3 jobs, saving. But physical therapy school? That's expensive. and people like me don't usually get those chances. She looked at Richard's card, still on the table where he'd left it. So thank you for the card, but if this is charity, keep it. I don't need pity. It's not charity, Richard said. Then what is it? Richard thought about his son, about the walls he'd built, about the assumptions he'd made, about the way Maya had seen Marcus, really seen him, when so many people looked through him. It's an investment, Richard said, in the kind of person who makes the world better, who sees people, who creates beauty in unexpected places. He paused, and maybe it's an apology. 6 months later, Richard Carmichael sat in a different restaurant, not for business, not for networking, but to celebrate. Maya had called him, used that business card, not immediately. She'd waited 3 weeks, her pride and his privilege, creating a cautious dance of their own. But when they finally talked, Richard learned something about himself that he'd managed to avoid for decades. He'd spent years funding things, charities, scholarships, tax-deductible donations that looked impressive in annual reports and earned favorable press. But he'd never actually invested in a person, really invested, with time, mentorship, genuine care. He'd paid for Maya's physical therapy school. But more than that, he'd connected her with the best pediatric specialists in the country. Had Marcus's physical therapist work with her on specialized techniques, had his assistant help her navigate the complex world of professional licensing and healthcare bureaucracy. He showed up, not just with money, but with presence. And something changed in Richard, too. He started volunteering at Marcus's therapy center. Started a foundation, not just another tax shelter, but a real program focused on accessibility in the arts, dance programs for disabled children, music therapy, movement medicine. He partnered with Maya on the vision because she knew what those children needed. She'd been one of them. Marcus had a new physical therapist now. Her name was Maya, and twice a week after her classes, she'd come to their house, not just for therapy, but to dance. On this particular evening, the celebration, Maya had graduated, top of her class. She'd been offered positions at 3 prestigious hospitals, and she'd turned them all down. Why? Richard had asked, genuinely confused. Maya smiled. Because I'm opening my own practice, in the neighborhood where I grew up, where kids like me can't usually afford specialists, where families work 3 jobs and still can't make ends meet. I'm going to make it work on a sliding scale. No one gets turned away, and I'm going to teach other therapists from communities like mine my grandmother's techniques, the dance techniques, the ones that see children as whole people, not broken bodies. Richard felt something warm spread through his chest. Pride, not for what he'd done, but for who Maya was becoming. Who she'd always been, actually. Now she just had the platform. Thank you, Maya said, her hand on his arm, for seeing me, for believing in me, for letting me help Marcus, and letting Marcus help me. I didn't do much, Richard said. You did everything, Maya corrected gently. You recognized humanity. You used your privilege to open doors instead of hoarding it. You let yourself be changed. Richard looked across the restaurant, where Marcus was showing Maya's grandmother's photograph to her former classmates, animated, confident, dancing in his wheelchair. And Richard realized, that night at Harvest Moon, Maya hadn't just helped his son dance. She'd taught Richard how to see, really see, beyond his assumptions, beyond his bubble of wealth and isolation. She'd taught him that humanity isn't a transaction, it's a dance. And sometimes, the people with the least have the most to teach. Here's the truth about that night. Richard didn't change Maya's life. Not really. Maya was always going to be extraordinary, always going to fight for her dreams, always going to see people, really see them, in a world that too often looks past Black women, disabled bodies, and anyone who doesn't fit the mold of who supposedly matters. What Richard did was get out of the way. He used his resources not to save her, but to accelerate her. And in doing so, he let himself be saved, from a life of transaction without connection, from walls so high he couldn't see the beauty on the other side, from the prison of privilege that isolates as much as it elevates. Marcus still dances, in his wheelchair, in therapy, at home, sometimes alone, sometimes with Maya, sometimes with children from her new practice who are learning that their bodies don't define them, their spirits do. And Maya? She's changing lives every single day, teaching children, Black children, disabled children, children the world might overlook, that they are worthy, visible, whole, that they can dance. This is what happens when we see each other, really see, beyond race, beyond ability, beyond class. When we recognize that humanity isn't divided into those who serve and those who are served, but into those who show up with open hearts and those who are still learning how. Richard learned, and maybe so can we. What moments have opened your eyes? What encounters changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments, because every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard, every life deserves to dance. Thank you for being here, for witnessing, for staying. Until next time, keep writing your chapter, keep living your truth, and never forget, your story is worth telling.